This is what I think of fake checks from people like you. The words cut through the air of Riverside Financial Group's main branch in Charlotte, North Carolina like a knife through flesh. Sharon Mitchell, a woman who had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder at this very bank, held a $50,000 cashier's check between her perfectly manicured fingers. Her lips curled into a smirk that carried the weight of every assumption she had ever made about the man standing before her. The lighter fluid had already soaked into the paper. The gold lighter in her other hand caught the overhead lights, sending tiny reflections dancing across the marble desk that separated her from Marcus Bennett. 23 customers stood frozen in the lobby, their transactions forgotten, their voices silenced by the scene unfolding before them. The security guard near the entrance didn't move. The tellers behind the counter didn't speak. It was as if the entire branch had been dipped in ice. Sharon flicked the lighter. A small flame appeared, hungry and eager. She touched it to the corner of the check, and the paper began to curl, blacken, and turn to ash. Marcus Bennett watched his check, a legitimate cashier's check bearing the bank's own watermark, issued by the bank's own Atlanta branch, disappear into nothing. Something settled in Marcus's chest as he watched the flames consume his property. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It wasn't shock, because a black man in America learns early that shock is a luxury he cannot afford. What Marcus felt was something far more dangerous than rage. It was absolute clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when the universe confirms what you've always suspected. The kind of clarity that precedes change. But to understand how Marcus Bennett arrived at this moment, standing in a bank lobby watching a manager destroy his legitimate financial document, we need to go back 3 hours. We need to see what Sharon Mitchell saw when Marcus first walked through those glass doors. And more importantly, we need to understand what she failed to see. 3 hours earlier, Marcus Bennett had walked into Riverside Financial Group wearing what he called his Thursday uniform. Faded jeans that had seen better days. A Howard University hoodie, the crimson letters slightly worn from years of washing. Work boots still carrying dust from the construction site where he had spent his morning, walking through a development project, talking to workers, checking on progress. At 38 years old, Marcus had developed a personal philosophy about human nature. He believed that how people treated you in the first 30 seconds of meeting you told you everything you needed to know about their character. Not how they treated you after they learned your title. Not how they behaved once they understood your net worth. The first 30 seconds, when you were just a stranger walking through the door, revealed the truth of a person's soul. Sharon Mitchell failed that test spectacularly. She had looked up from her marble desk as Marcus approached, and in her eyes, he watched a story being written. A story based not on facts but on assumptions. Not on evidence but on prejudice. Her gaze traveled from his dusty boots to his faded jeans to his casual hoodie, and by the time her eyes reached his face, Sharon Mitchell had already decided who Marcus Bennett was. "Can I help you?" The question carried no actual offer of help. It was a challenge, a barrier, a way of saying, "What are you doing here?" without speaking those exact words. Marcus had smiled the patient smile his grandmother Clara had taught him during her stories about surviving Jim Crow in rural Georgia. "Yes, ma'am. I need to deposit this cashier's check into my business account." He had placed the check on her desk, the $50,000 figure clearly visible. Sharon's eyes had widened momentarily at the amount before narrowing with suspicion. She didn't pick up the check. She didn't examine it. She didn't reach for her phone to call the verification department. Instead, she leaned back in her leather chair and delivered her verdict. "We don't cash checks of this size for walk-ins." Marcus had maintained his composure. "I'm not looking to cash it, ma'am. I want to deposit it into my existing account. And this is a cashier's check from your own bank. It was issued by Riverside Financial Group's Atlanta branch." Sharon's response came quick and sharp, like she had been waiting for the opportunity. "I've been a bank manager for 15 years, and I know a fraudulent check when I see one. The paper quality is wrong. The routing numbers look suspicious." She had paused, letting her next words drip with contempt. "And quite frankly, construction workers don't carry around $50,000 checks." The way she emphasized construction workers made several customers in the lobby shift uncomfortably. A mother pulled her young son closer. An elderly man lowered his newspaper. Everyone heard the implication buried in those words. Everyone understood what Sharon was really saying. Marcus had tried one more time, his voice calm and measured. "Ma'am, if you just call your authentication department, they can verify." Sharon held up one hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. Her nails were painted a deep burgundy, perfectly shaped, not a single chip or imperfection. "I don't need to call anyone. I've been doing this job long enough to recognize fraud when it walks through my door." She reached for her desk phone, and the next words out of her mouth would set in motion a chain of events that would destroy her career, her reputation, and her future. "I'm calling the police." The call took less than 2 minutes. Sharon Mitchell spoke with the confidence of a woman who had never faced consequences for her assumptions. She reported a suspicious individual attempting to cash a fraudulent check. She mentioned that the suspect had become agitated when questioned. She suggested he might be dangerous. None of this was true. Marcus had not raised his voice. Marcus had not made any threatening gestures. Marcus had stood calmly on the other side of her desk, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. But Sharon's version of events was the one that mattered, because Sharon was the one with the power to make a phone call that would bring armed officers into the lobby. 2 Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officers arrived within minutes. Officer Williams, a 20-year member of the force with gray touching his temples, entered first. His partner, a younger officer named Rodriguez, followed close behind. Their hands rested on their belts, not on their weapons, but the message was clear. Sharon Mitchell rose from her desk and approached the officers with the theatrical concern of a woman performing victimhood. "Thank you for coming so quickly. This man," she gestured toward Marcus with visible disgust, "walked in here with what is clearly a forged check and became aggressive when I refused to cash it." Officer Williams looked at Marcus. He had been on the force long enough to develop instincts about people, and something about this situation didn't sit right with him. The man standing before him showed no signs of aggression. His body language was calm, controlled, almost unnaturally patient for someone who had just been accused of a crime. "Sir, may I see the check in question?" Officer Williams asked. "The manager has it on her desk," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "It's a legitimate cashier's check issued by this bank's Atlanta branch." Officer Williams walked to Sharon's desk and picked up the check. He examined it under the bright lights of the lobby, turning it over, holding it up, studying every detail. What he saw made his brow furrow with confusion. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this check has your bank's federal routing number. It has your bank's official seal. It even has the anti-fraud watermark that's only visible under UV light." Sharon's confidence didn't waver. 15 years of never being questioned had built an armor of arrogance that mere facts could not penetrate. "Clearly it's a sophisticated forgery. That's exactly what I've been trying to explain. I want this man arrested for attempted fraud." Officer Williams looked at the check again, then at Marcus, then back at Sharon. "Sir, you mentioned this was for a deposit into your existing account. Do you bank here?" Marcus nodded. "I have 17 business accounts with Riverside Financial Group. Across 8 states. But I've never visited this particular branch before today." Sharon scoffed loudly. "Oh, please. 17 accounts? This is exactly the kind of elaborate story these people create. Anyone can say anything. Just arrest him already so I can get back to serving my legitimate customers." Those words, "these people," and "legitimate customers," hung in the air like poison. Every person in the lobby heard them. Every person understood their meaning. And every person would remember them when the truth finally came to light. Officer Williams made a decision. He could arrest Marcus based on Sharon's accusations and sort out the truth later. That would be the easy path, the path of least resistance. Or he could make one phone call and verify the facts before taking action that could destroy an innocent man's life. "Ma'am," Officer Williams said, "before we proceed, I'm going to make a phone call to verify the check's authenticity." "This is ridiculous," Sharon snapped. "I've been a bank manager for 15 years. I don't need some police officer to tell me what's real and what's fake. Just do your job and remove this man from my bank." But Officer Williams was already dialing. Not the fraud department. Not the Atlanta branch. He called the number for Riverside Financial Group's corporate headquarters in New York City. He asked to speak with someone on the executive team. What happened during that phone call would be replayed on security cameras, discussed in boardrooms, and analyzed by legal teams for months to come. But in that moment, all anyone in the lobby could see was the slow transformation of Sharon Mitchell's face as the truth began to emerge. The phone call lasted exactly 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, Officer Williams spoke in a low voice, nodding occasionally, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to something that looked almost like disbelief. Meanwhile, Sharon Mitchell stood near her desk with her arms crossed, radiating impatience and irritation. "This is a complete waste of time," she announced to no one in particular. "I have actual customers to serve. Legitimate customers who don't walk in off the street with fake checks and ridiculous stories about having 17 accounts." Marcus Bennett remained still. He had not moved from his spot near the center of the lobby. His hands hung loose at his sides, his breathing was even, and his face betrayed no emotion. If anyone had been paying close attention, they might have noticed something strange about his calm. It was not the nervous stillness of a man waiting to be arrested. It was the patient stillness of a man who knew exactly how this story would end. Officer Williams ended his call and stood motionless for a long moment, the phone still pressed against his ear even though the line had gone dead. He seemed to be processing information that didn't fit into any category he had prepared for. When he finally looked up, his eyes went first to Marcus Bennett, and in them was something that hadn't been there before: respect. "Ma'am," Officer Williams said, turning slowly to face Sharon Mitchell, "I need you to step away from your desk." Sharon blinked, confusion breaking through her armor of arrogance for the first time. "Excuse me? Step away from your desk, please. Effective immediately, you are terminated from your position at this bank. Corporate security is on their way to escort you from the premises." The lobby fell into a silence so complete that the soft hum of the air conditioning became audible. 23 customers stood frozen, their eyes darting between Sharon, the officer, and the man in the dusty work boots who still hadn't moved. Sharon's laugh was brittle, sharp, and edged with the beginning of panic. "You can't fire me. You're a police officer, not my employer. This is absolutely insane. I'm going to file a complaint. I'm going to call my union representative. I'm not firing you," Officer Williams interrupted, his voice calm but firm. He turned to look at Marcus Bennett, and when he spoke again, his tone carried a note of something approaching wonder. "Mr. Bennett is firing you." "Mr. Bennett?" Sharon repeated the name like it was a foreign word she had never heard before. "That man? That construction worker? He can't fire me. He's not my employer. He's a criminal who should be in handcuffs right now." Officer Williams shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, Marcus Bennett doesn't just bank at Riverside Financial Group." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "Marcus Bennett owns Riverside Financial Group." The words landed like bombs in the quiet lobby. Several customers gasped. One of the tellers behind the counter dropped a stack of papers she had been holding. The security guard near the door stood up straighter, suddenly very interested in appearing professional. Sharon's face cycled through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, denial, fear, and finally something that looked like the beginning of genuine terror. That's not possible. He's wearing work boots. He's dressed like a what, ma'am?" Officer Williams asked quietly. "What exactly is he dressed like?" Sharon didn't answer. She couldn't answer, because any word she chose would damn her further. The assumptions she had made, the judgments she had passed, the words she had spoken, all of it was now being reflected back at her in the harsh light of truth. Marcus Bennett finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and carried across the lobby with the quiet authority of a man who had no need to shout. "To be precise, my private equity firm acquired 72% of Riverside Financial Group's shares 8 months ago. The total investment was $340 million. I've been visiting branches across our network, evaluating management, assessing customer service, and identifying areas where we need to make changes." He paused, letting the information settle over the room like a fog. "The construction clothes? I started my career with a small construction company in Durham, North Carolina, 15 years ago. I still visit job sites. I still wear my work boots. I've never stopped remembering where I came from." Marcus looked directly at Sharon. "That $50,000 check you burned? It represents the sale of a commercial property I owned in Atlanta. Pocket change compared to what my firm has invested in this bank. But you didn't bother to verify any of that. You took one look at me and decided you knew everything you needed to know." Sharon's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The arrogance that had defined her for 15 years had evaporated in an instant, leaving behind something raw and exposed. I couldn't have known." She stammered. "No," Marcus agreed. "You couldn't have known who I was. But that's exactly the point. You shouldn't need to know someone's net worth or title to treat them with basic dignity and respect. Every customer who walks through those doors deserves the same professional service. That's what banking is supposed to be about." The lobby doors opened, and Thomas Caldwell, the regional director, rushed in from his Raleigh office. He was sweating, his tie slightly askew, and his face was pale with worry. He hadn't come to smooth things over or minimize the damage. He had come because he understood exactly how catastrophic this moment was for everyone involved. "Mr. Bennett," Thomas said, slightly out of breath, "I cannot begin to apologize enough for what has happened here today. This is absolutely unacceptable, and I want you to know that we are taking immediate action." Marcus held up a hand. "Thomas, let me ask you something. How long has Sharon Mitchell been managing this branch?" 6 years, sir." "And in those 6 years, how many complaints have been filed against her?" Thomas hesitated, his discomfort visible. "Sir, I'm not sure this is the appropriate time or place to." "How many complaints, Thomas?" The regional director swallowed hard. 17 formal complaints in the last 8 months alone. 12 of them involved customers of color being denied services, questioned about legitimate transactions, or subjected to excessive verification procedures. Marcus nodded slowly. And how many of those complaints mentioned Sharon Mitchell by name? 14, sir. The number hung in the air, heavy and damning. 17 complaints. 12 involving discrimination. 14 naming Sharon specifically. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern, a practice, a systematic abuse of power that had been allowed to continue for far too long. We had been building a case for termination, Thomas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The board wanted ironclad documentation before taking action. We were concerned about potential legal complications, about wrongful termination suits, about protecting the institution more than protecting its customers. Marcus finished for him. I understand the impulse, Thomas. But that's going to change. Starting today. Sharon Mitchell had sunk into her leather chair, her face ashen, her hands trembling. The reality of her situation was beginning to crystallize. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about everything she had built over 15 years crumbling to dust in the space of a few minutes. I didn't know, she whispered. How was I supposed to know who he was? Marcus turned to face her directly. That's the question you should be asking yourself, isn't it? Not, how was I supposed to know who he was, but, why did it matter who he was? Would burning that check have been acceptable if I really were just a construction worker? Would denying me service have been justified if I didn't own this bank? Would calling the police on me have been appropriate if I were simply a black man trying to deposit a legitimate check? Sharon had no answer. There was no answer she could give that wouldn't condemn her further. Let me tell you what I saw when I walked into this branch today, Marcus continued. I saw a beautiful building with marble floors and expensive furniture. I saw professional signage and well-dressed employees. I saw all the outward markers of a successful financial institution. But I also saw something else. I saw a security guard who didn't move when a customer was being mistreated. I saw tellers who looked away rather than speak up against injustice. I saw 23 customers who stood in silence while a woman destroyed a legitimate financial document and accused an innocent man of fraud. He looked around the lobby, making eye contact with as many people as possible. This is what discrimination looks like in modern America. It doesn't always wear a white hood or burn crosses on lawns. Sometimes it wears a business suit and sits behind a marble desk. Sometimes it smiles politely while denying you service. Sometimes it speaks in coded language, people like you, these people, construction workers' language designed to communicate contempt without saying anything that could be quoted in a lawsuit. Officer Williams, who had been standing quietly during this exchange, stepped forward. Mr. Bennett, I want to apologize on behalf of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. We responded to a call that contained false information. Ms. Mitchell's report stated that you were aggressive and potentially dangerous. Based on what I witnessed, that characterization was completely inaccurate. I appreciate that, officer, Marcus replied. You did your job professionally, and you took the time to verify the facts before taking action. Not everyone would have done that. You could have arrested me based solely on her word, and we would have sorted out the truth later after I'd been handcuffed in front of witnesses, after my mugshot had been taken, after my name had been dragged through the system. Officer Williams nodded gravely. He understood exactly what Marcus was saying. He understood the statistics, the history, the countless black men who had been arrested on false accusations and never recovered from the experience even after being exonerated. There will need to be a report filed, Officer Williams said. Ms. Mitchell made false statements to law enforcement, which is a criminal offense. She also destroyed what appears to be a legitimate financial instrument, which is another serious charge. I'll need to gather statements from witnesses and review the security camera footage. Everything that happened today was captured on those cameras, Thomas Caldwell confirmed. I'll ensure you have full access to all footage. Sharon Mitchell's head snapped up. You can't use that footage against me. I have rights. I want to speak to a lawyer. You have every right to legal representation, Officer Williams replied. And you're going to need it. Destruction of financial instruments is a felony. Filing a false police report is a felony. Discrimination in banking services is a violation of federal civil rights laws. Those are just the criminal charges. The civil liability you're facing from Mr. Bennett and potentially from other customers you've mistreated over the years, that's an entirely separate matter. The color drained from Sharon's face completely. She looked like a woman watching her entire life collapse in real time, which, in a sense, she was. 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder. 6 years of managing this branch. Countless mornings of waking up and putting on her professional armor, believing herself to be successful, powerful, in control. All of it was burning away, just like the check she had set aflame. I want you to understand something, Marcus said, his voice carrying a weight that commanded attention. I didn't come here today to catch anyone doing wrong. I came here because my team had identified concerning patterns in this branch's customer service data. I wanted to see for myself whether those patterns reflected systemic problems or isolated incidents. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he withdrew a laminated card that he had not shown to anyone. My firm conducts what we call fairness audits. We send testers into our branch's people of different races, different genders, different socioeconomic presentations to evaluate how they're treated. We compare the experiences of a black man in work clothes to a white man in a business suit. We document the differences. We identify managers who allow bias to infect their customer service. Marcus held up the card. It was his corporate ID, bearing his name, his photo, and his title, CEO, Bennett Capital Partners. I am one of those testers. When the patterns at a particular branch are concerning enough, I do the audit myself. I walk in dressed exactly as I would if I were still working on construction sites. I present legitimate transactions and see how I'm treated. I give people every opportunity to demonstrate basic professionalism. He looked at Sharon with something that might have been pity. You had every opportunity to treat me like a human being. Every opportunity to pick up the phone and verify my check. Every opportunity to apologize for any confusion and process my transaction. Instead, you chose to humiliate me. You chose to call the police. You chose to accuse me of being a criminal. And when none of that worked, you chose to destroy my property in front of witnesses. The lobby doors opened again, and two men in corporate security uniforms entered. They were calm and professional, but their presence sent a clear message: this was no longer a discussion. This was a removal. Sharon Mitchell, one of the security officers, said, "You are to gather your personal belongings and leave the premises immediately. You are not to return to this branch or any Riverside Financial Group property. Your access credentials have been terminated, and your employment has been ended effective immediately." Sharon stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. 15 years, she whispered. I gave this company 15 years of my life. And in return, Marcus replied, you damaged countless lives with your discrimination. You turned away qualified customers based on the color of their skin. You denied loans to people who deserved them. You subjected innocent people to unnecessary scrutiny and humiliation. 15 years isn't something to be proud of when that's how you spent them. As the security officers escorted Sharon toward the exit, she turned back one last time, her eyes finding Marcus across the lobby. You set me up, she hissed. This was all a trap. You came in here looking like that on purpose, knowing I would react. I came in here looking like myself, Marcus interrupted. The trap was one you built yourself, over years of treating people as less than human based on how they looked. I just gave you the opportunity to prove who you really are. You did the rest entirely on your own. The doors closed behind Sharon Mitchell, and the lobby seemed to exhale. The tension that had been building for the past hour began to dissipate, replaced by something else, a sense of witnessing history, of being present for a moment that would be talked about for years to come. The security cameras had captured everything. Every word, every gesture, every moment of Sharon Mitchell's arrogance and eventual downfall was preserved in digital clarity. But the cameras had also captured something else, something that most people in the lobby hadn't noticed during the confrontation. They had captured Marcus Bennett's extraordinary patience. Not once during the entire ordeal had Marcus raised his voice. Not once had his hands clenched into fists. Not once had he given Sharon or the responding officers any legitimate reason to view him as a threat. He had stood in the center of that lobby, enduring accusations and insults, knowing exactly who he was and exactly how this story would end. Thomas Caldwell approached Marcus after Sharon had been removed from the premises. Sir, the board has been informed of today's events. They're requesting an emergency meeting via video conference as soon as possible. And our legal team wants to discuss next steps regarding both the criminal charges and the civil liability. That can wait, Marcus said. Right now, I want to address the people in this lobby. They deserve to understand what they witnessed today. He turned to face the 23 customers who remained in the branch. Most of them had been frozen in place throughout the confrontation, too shocked to move, too uncertain about what to do. Now they watched Marcus with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and something that looked like hope. My name is Marcus Bennett. By now you know that I own the majority stake in this bank. But I want to tell you something more important than my net worth or my title. I want to tell you why I bought Riverside Financial Group in the first place. He paused, gathering his thoughts, reaching back across decades of memory to a story that still carried weight in his heart. In 1987, a woman named Clara Bennett walked into a Riverside Financial Group branch in this very city. She was my grandmother, the woman who raised me after my parents died. Clara had spent 20 years building a cleaning business from nothing, working nights, saving every penny, dreaming of expansion. She needed a small business loan to buy equipment and hire employees. It wasn't a lot of money. Maybe $5,000. Marcus's voice remained steady, but something deeper had entered his tone. Something personal. The loan officer at that time looked at my grandmother the same way Sharon Mitchell looked at me today. He saw a black woman in simple clothes, asking for capital. He saw someone he had already decided was unworthy. And he told Clara Bennett these were his exact words, that her kind wasn't a good credit risk. Several people in the lobby shook their heads. An elderly black woman pressed her hand to her chest, recognition and pain crossing her face. My grandmother's business failed without that capital. She lost everything she had worked for. She never recovered financially, and she never stopped talking about that day until the day she died. She taught me that institutions don't change on their own. They change when the people who've been hurt by them gain the power to demand change. Marcus looked around the lobby, at the marble floors and expensive fixtures, at the professional signage bearing the Riverside Financial Group logo. I bought this bank because I could. I bought it because I had the resources and the opportunity to transform an institution that had caused harm into one that could create opportunity. And I bought it because I made a promise to my grandmother's memory that I would never let anyone else experience what she experienced. At least, not in any institution I had the power to influence. A young black man near the back of the lobby spoke up. But what about the people who already experienced it? The ones Sharon Mitchell denied services to? What happens to them? That's an excellent question, Marcus replied. And it's one we're going to address starting today. Anyone who filed a complaint against this branch in the past 2 years is going to receive a personal call from our customer relations team. We're going to review every denial of service, every unnecessary verification, every instance where someone was treated as less than fully human. Where we find discrimination, we're going to make it right. Thomas Caldwell stepped forward, looking uncertain. Sir, that's a significant commitment. The legal exposure alone is exactly what we deserve, Marcus finished. We allowed this to happen. We saw the complaints coming in and we moved too slowly to address them. We prioritized avoiding wrongful termination lawsuits over protecting the customers we're supposed to serve. That changes now. He turned back to the customers in the lobby. What you witnessed today was wrong. It was wrong when Sharon Mitchell looked at me and saw a criminal instead of a customer. It was wrong when she destroyed my property rather than verify its authenticity. It was wrong when she called the police and lied about my behavior. But here's what I want you to understand, Sharon Mitchell wasn't acting in a vacuum. She was acting within a system that allowed her behavior to continue for years. Marcus gestured around the lobby. Look at this building. It's beautiful, isn't it? Marble floors, expensive furniture, professional everything. But all of that is just decoration if the people inside don't treat every customer with dignity. A bank isn't its building. A bank is its culture, its values, its commitment to serving everyone fairly regardless of how they look or what they wear or where they come from. Officer Williams, who had remained in the lobby to gather witness statements, approached Marcus. Mr. Bennett, I need to take your formal statement about the events of today. And I have to say, in 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything quite like what happened here. I imagine you've seen plenty of situations where someone was profiled based on their appearance, Marcus replied. I have. But I've never seen it end quite like this. That's because it usually doesn't. Usually, the person being profiled doesn't have the resources to fight back. Usually, there are no consequences for the people who discriminate. Usually, the system protects the powerful and ignores the vulnerable. Marcus shook his head. I'm in a position to change that dynamic, at least within the institutions I control. But I'm one person with one company. Real change requires more than individual action. It requires transforming the systems themselves. A middle-aged white woman who had been standing near the teller windows approached hesitantly. I saw everything that happened. I should have said something. When she was treating you that way, I should have spoken up. But I didn't, and I'm ashamed of that. Marcus regarded her for a moment. What's your name? Patricia. Patricia Hendricks. Patricia, let me ask you something. If you had spoken up, what do you think would have happened? The woman hesitated. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe Sharon would have turned on me too. Maybe she would have called security. I was scared, I guess. That fear is understandable. Speaking up against power always carries risk. But I want you to think about something. When you stood in silence, watching Sharon humiliate me, you became part of the system that allowed her behavior. Not because you're a bad person, I can see that you're not, but because silence in the face of injustice is always interpreted as consent. Patricia nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I'm sorry. I really am. I appreciate that. And here's what I'm going to ask of you, and of everyone who witnessed today's events. Don't just be sorry. Be different. The next time you see someone being mistreated, whether it's in a bank or a restaurant or a store or anywhere else, speak up. Your voice matters. Your intervention could be the thing that changes the outcome for someone who doesn't have the power to protect themselves. The elderly black woman who had pressed her hand to her chest earlier stepped forward. Young man, I've been banking at Riverside for 42 years. I've seen managers come and go. I've been treated well by some and poorly by others. But I've never seen anyone do what you just did: use their power to demand accountability, to honor the memory of someone who was wronged, to transform an institution from the inside out. She reached out and took Marcus's hands in her own. Her grip was gentle but firm, carrying the strength of someone who had weathered decades of struggle. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Clara Bennett's name will be remembered now, not as a woman who was denied alone, but as the inspiration for something beautiful. Marcus felt something catch in his throat. For all his composure throughout the confrontation, this moment of genuine human connection threatened to break through his professional armor. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than you know." Officer Williams completed his preliminary interviews and informed Marcus that detectives would be in touch to coordinate the formal investigation. Ms. Mitchell is facing serious charges. Between the destruction of the check, the false police report, and the pattern of discrimination, this is going to be a significant case. "I want it handled fairly," Marcus said. "She deserves due process, the same due process she tried to deny me. Let the evidence speak for itself. Let witnesses testify to what they saw. Let the legal system work the way it's supposed to work." "You're not going to push for maximum charges?" "I'm going to push for justice. Sometimes that means maximum consequences, and sometimes it means allowing someone to face appropriate accountability without destroying them entirely. The goal isn't vengeance. The goal is making sure this never happens again, not just at this branch, but at every branch, in every institution, across the entire system." The story broke within hours. In the age of smartphones and social media, it was inevitable. Several customers had recorded portions of the confrontation on their phones, and within minutes of leaving the bank, they had uploaded the footage to every platform imaginable. "Bank manager burns black customer's check not knowing he owns the bank." The headline spread like wildfire across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. News outlets picked up the story, first local stations in Charlotte, then regional networks, then national media. By evening, Marcus Bennett's face was on every major news channel, and Sharon Mitchell's career destruction was being dissected by commentators across the political spectrum. The security camera footage was even more damning than the cell phone videos. It captured everything in crisp, clear detail: Sharon's dismissive attitude from the moment Marcus entered, her refusal to verify the check, her decision to call the police, her lies to the responding officers, and finally, the moment when she deliberately set the check ablaze. It also captured something that the public found even more compelling: Marcus's extraordinary patience throughout the ordeal. His calm demeanor, his measured responses, his refusal to give Sharon any justification for her accusations of aggression, all of it stood in stark contrast to the stereotypes she had projected onto him. Civil rights organizations issued statements praising Marcus's methodology. "This is exactly the kind of systematic documentation that has been needed for years," said the head of a major advocacy group. Mr. Bennett didn't just catch one bad actor. He exposed a pattern of discrimination that had been allowed to flourish under the radar. His fairness audit model should be adopted by financial institutions nationwide. Former customers of the Charlotte branch began coming forward with their own stories. A black doctor who had been questioned extensively when trying to wire money to his elderly mother. A black business owner whose deposits had been held for unnecessary periods, causing cash flow problems for her company. A black family who had been humiliated during their mortgage application, treated as suspicious despite having excellent credit. Each story added weight to the case against Sharon Mitchell, and each story illustrated that her treatment of Marcus Bennett was not an aberration but a pattern. She had been treating black customers as potential criminals for years, and the institution had allowed it to continue despite mounting complaints. Thomas Caldwell held a press conference outside the Charlotte branch. His face was drawn, and he read from a prepared statement with the careful diction of someone who had been extensively coached by lawyers. "Riverside Financial Group is deeply troubled by the events that occurred at our Charlotte branch today. The behavior exhibited by our former branch manager was completely unacceptable and contrary to everything we stand for as an organization. We have terminated her employment effective immediately, and we are cooperating fully with law enforcement as they investigate potential criminal charges." He paused, looking up from his notes. "We also want to acknowledge that this incident has exposed serious failures in our internal oversight systems. We received multiple complaints about discrimination at this branch, and we did not act quickly enough or decisively enough to address them. That failure is unacceptable, and we are committed to implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. Questions came rapid fire from the assembled reporters. What about the other customers who were discriminated against? Will they receive compensation? We are reaching out to everyone who filed a complaint and reviewing each case individually. Where we find that customers were treated unfairly, we will make it right. What about Sharon Mitchell? Have you spoken with her since her termination? Ms. Mitchell is no longer an employee of Riverside Financial Group. We cannot comment on ongoing legal matters. Is it true that Marcus Bennett, the customer involved in today's incident, is actually the majority owner of Riverside Financial Group? Thomas Caldwell hesitated. This was the question everyone wanted answered, the detail that had transformed a troubling incident into a national sensation. I can confirm that Bennett Capital Partners holds a majority stake in Riverside Financial Group. Mr. Bennett chose to visit our Charlotte branch in a personal capacity, without identifying himself as a stakeholder. His experience today has provided us with invaluable insight into areas where we need to improve. The reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but Thomas had already stepped away from the microphone. There was nothing more he could say that wouldn't make things worse. Meanwhile, Sharon Mitchell sat in her living room, staring at her phone as notification after notification rolled in. Former colleagues sending brief messages of sympathy that carefully avoided taking her side. Friends who hadn't spoken to her in years suddenly reaching out to ask if the person on the news was really her. And worst of all, the endless stream of social media commentary from strangers who had watched the videos and rendered their verdicts without appeal. This is what happens when you judge people by their appearance. She thought she was so powerful. Look at her now. Karma is beautiful when it's caught on camera. Sharon's husband had retreated to the bedroom, unable to face the avalanche of attention. Her adult children had called, their voices carrying a mixture of concern and something that sounded like shame. Her attorney, hastily retained that afternoon, had warned her not to speak to anyone and to prepare for the possibility of arrest. 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder. 6 years of managing a successful branch. And it was all gone in the space of an afternoon because she couldn't look past a pair of dusty work boots to see the person wearing them. The arrest came the following morning. 2 detectives arrived at Sharon's home with a warrant charging her with destruction of financial instruments, filing a false police report, and multiple counts of discrimination under federal civil rights law. She was photographed, fingerprinted, and processed through the same system she had so casually tried to weaponize against Marcus Bennett. Her bail hearing made national news. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps as Sharon walked in, her face hidden behind sunglasses that did nothing to disguise her identity. She posted bond within hours, but the images of her being led into the courthouse had already become the defining visual of the story. Marcus Bennett, by contrast, had retreated from public view. He declined interview requests from every major network and allowed his communications team to handle media inquiries. When he finally did make a public statement, it was not about Sharon Mitchell's arrest or the viral videos. It was about his grandmother. Clara Bennett passed away in 2019, never having received justice for what happened to her in 1987. She never saw the loan officer who denied her face any consequences for his discrimination. She lived with the weight of that humiliation for 32 years. Marcus paused, looking directly into the camera. I cannot change what happened to my grandmother. I cannot go back in time and give her the loan she deserved, or the respect she was denied. But I can ensure that her story is remembered. I can transform the very institution that hurt her into something she would have been proud of. And I can make a promise to every customer who has ever been discriminated against by Riverside Financial Group. We see you, we believe you, and we are committed to making things right. He announced the establishment of the Clara Bennett Small Business Fund with an initial deposit of $5 million. The fund would provide loans to minority-owned businesses in Charlotte, with preference given to entrepreneurs who had been denied capital elsewhere. The interest rates would be fair, the terms would be reasonable, and every loan officer would undergo comprehensive bias training that included watching the security footage from Marcus's visit to the Charlotte branch. This is not about revenge, Marcus concluded. This is about redemption. Institutions can change. Systems can be reformed. But only if the people who have been harmed by those systems gain the power to demand change. My grandmother didn't have that power. I do. And I intend to use it. The response was overwhelming. Applications for the Clara Bennett Fund exceeded expectations within the first week. News coverage shifted from the drama of Sharon Mitchell's downfall to the inspiration of Marcus Bennett's vision. What had begun as a story about racism and humiliation was becoming something more, a story about justice, transformation, and the possibility of redemption. Sharon Mitchell's trial was scheduled for the following year. The evidence against her was substantial: security footage, witness testimony, a documented pattern of complaints, and the physical remnants of the check she had destroyed. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal that included probation, community service, mandatory diversity training, and permanent banishment from the banking industry. Some commentators felt the punishment was too lenient. Others argued that destroying her career and reputation was consequence enough. Marcus Bennett declined to weigh in publicly, saying only that he hoped the legal system would serve justice and that Sharon might use this experience as an opportunity for genuine reflection and change. "I don't know what's in her heart," Marcus said when asked about his feelings toward Sharon. "I don't know whether she's capable of recognizing the harm she's caused and working to become a different person. That's between her and her conscience. What I do know is that accountability is not the same as vengeance. I wanted her to face consequences for her actions, not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because actions without consequences breed more harm. Maybe she'll learn from this. Maybe she won't. But at least now, other people who might be tempted to discriminate will think twice, knowing that their actions might be caught on camera and their victims might turn out to be the ones with power." 6 months after the incident at the Charlotte branch, Marcus Bennett returned to Riverside Financial Group. Not to conduct another fairness audit, but to celebrate the grand reopening of the renovated location. The marble desk where Sharon Mitchell had burned his check was gone, replaced by an open floor plan designed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. The staff had been completely retrained, and several positions had been filled by candidates from underrepresented communities. A framed photograph hung in the lobby, visible to every customer who entered. It showed Clara Bennett in her youth, standing in front of a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Clara's Cleaning Services." The plaque beneath the photo explained her story, the dream she had pursued, the rejection she had faced, and the legacy she had left behind. The Clara Bennett Small Business Fund had approved over 200 loans in its first 6 months of operation. A bakery owner who had been denied credit at 3 different banks was now expanding to a second location. A tech entrepreneur whose applications had been rejected despite a perfect business plan was hiring his 10th employee. A woman who had grown up in the same neighborhood as Clara Bennett was opening a cleaning business of her own, her startup costs covered by the fund that bore Clara's name. Marcus stood in the renovated lobby, surrounded by community members, local politicians, and members of the media. But his eyes kept returning to the photograph of his grandmother, a woman who had never lived to see this moment but whose spirit had made it possible. "My grandmother taught me that justice isn't always immediate," Marcus said, his voice carrying through the crowd. "She waited 32 years for acknowledgement that never came. She died without ever hearing Riverside Financial Group admit that what they did to her was wrong." He paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. "But she also taught me something else. She taught me that the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward righteousness. Not on its own, we have to bend it. We have to push, and pull, and fight, and refuse to accept that discrimination is just the way things are. We have to believe that change is possible, even when the evidence suggests otherwise." Marcus looked around the lobby at the faces watching him, black and white, young and old, wealthy and working class. "What happened to me in this building 6 months ago was wrong. But it was also an opportunity. It exposed a rot that had been allowed to fester for too long. It created accountability where none had existed. And it gave us a chance to rebuild something better from the ashes." He smiled, and for the first time since the incident, it was a smile of genuine warmth rather than patient endurance. The check that Sharon Mitchell burned represented more than $50,000. It represented something that cannot be quantified: the audacity of a black man in America walking into any institution with his head held high, demanding to be seen as he truly is, valuable, legitimate, and worthy of respect. Marcus stepped back from the podium and gestured toward the photograph of his grandmother. Clara Bennett never got her loan. But today, because of her story, hundreds of entrepreneurs will get theirs. Clara Bennett never got an apology from this institution. But today, this institution bears her name and honors her memory. Clara Bennett never got justice in her lifetime. But today, 37 years later, justice has finally arrived. The applause began slowly and built to something overwhelming. People who had come expecting a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony found themselves wiping tears from their eyes. The story of Clara Bennett had become their story too, a story about perseverance, transformation, and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to mingle, Marcus stepped away from the crowd and stood alone before his grandmother's photograph. He pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the cool surface beneath his fingers, wishing he could somehow reach through time and tell her what had happened. "We did it, Grandma," he whispered. "We changed the building. We changed the culture. We changed the system. And somewhere, somehow, I hope you know that your story mattered. That your pain wasn't in vain. That your grandson remembered every lesson you taught him about patience, about dignity, and about never giving up on the possibility of justice." The photograph didn't answer, of course. Photographs never do. But Marcus could have sworn he felt something warm in that moment, a gentle presence at his shoulder, a soft voice whispering words of pride and love. Justice isn't always immediate. Sometimes it takes years, or decades, or generations. Sometimes the people who deserve it most never live to see it arrive. But when justice finally comes, when the scales finally balance, when the wrongs are finally acknowledged, when the powerful finally face consequences for their actions, it burns brighter than any flame. Brighter than the flame that destroyed a check. Brighter than the arrogance that lit it. Brighter than all the assumptions and prejudices that fuel discrimination in all its forms. Justice burns brightest when it illuminates the path forward, showing us what we can become when we refuse to accept what we have been. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice wears dusty work boots and a faded hoodie. Because justice doesn't care about appearances. Justice only cares about truth. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have revealed your identity immediately, or would you have waited, as he did, to see how far the discrimination would go? What part of this story shocked you the most? Drop your answers in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that justice matters, if you believe that dignity should never depend on net worth or appearance or the color of someone's skin, hit that subscribe button and join our community. More stories of karma, justice, and the power of truth are coming every week to Black Lives Stories. Because the world needs to remember that what goes around comes around. And it always burns brighter than the flame.